Welcome to Loving Me Before I Love You with Tammy Nicole, the podcast dedicated to you loving and putting yourself first. Others have come first in your life for years, and you know it's time for that to change. You're about to be empowered to set healthy boundaries, confidently have hard conversations, unapologetically put yourself first, and live the peaceful life you deserve. Remember, self-love is essential, and loving yourself sets the stage for every other love in your life. So get ready to embrace self-love like never before with your host, Coach Tammy Nicole.
You ever been hurt by someone who said they loved you and meant it, but still broke you anyway? Not by a stranger, not by someone you expected it from, but by someone who had access, someone who knew you, someone you let see you without the armor. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it messes with your mind. It makes you question your judgment, your standards, your ability to choose right. And if you're being real, it doesn't just make you feel afraid of them again. It actually makes you afraid of trusting yourself again. Because now the question isn't just, can I trust somebody else? It actually becomes, can I trust me not to end up here again? And that right there, that part is nobody talks about it. Nobody explores it. But healing after betrayal isn't just about forgiving them or moving on. It's actually about rebuilding the relationship you have with yourself, learning how to listen to your intuition and learning how to feel safe in your own decisions again. So learning how to open your heart without abandoning your standards. Yeah, that's the truth. That's where it sits. Because if you really think about it, closing your heart might protect you, but it also blocks the very love you say you want. So how do you find that balance? How do you heal without becoming hard? And how do you trust again without losing yourself in the process? Hi, I'm Coach Tammy Nicole. I help women every day reclaim their voice, their worth, and their power so that they can stand in clarity, confidence, and courage. And today, I'm joined by Teras Smith, and we are going to have a real conversation, an honest conversation about healing after betrayal and what it actually takes to trust again. And this is Loving Me Before I Love You, the podcast where you stop performing, start healing, and choosing ourselves on purpose. Welcome to the show, Teras. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for allowing me to be here.
I am so excited. I have wanted to have this conversation with you since we talked about your story so long. And it's like, this story needs to be out because so many women are going through it or have gone through it, and we struggle with trusting ourselves on the regular basis. I think a lot of times when we do go through betrayal, we in the beginning are mad at the other person, but I feel like later we become mad at ourselves because we start saying, well, you allowed it, or you opened the door, or you accepted it, or it becomes a beating session on ourselves, and we never really see things, I think, clearly from the full picture. Like, take the lens and bag it up and get the whole picture. It's like, this technically became your fault. And it's like, but it's not, And then once you get through that process of trying to learn, how do I heal so that I can actually move on and experience love again? And I think a lot of times we just think it's all romantic, and it's not just romantic, because you look at this person as somebody that you let in so close that it could be a friend. It could be a family member. It can be anybody that you just say, here I am, see me, that you now question 24/7. So I cannot wait to hear your story on how you have overcome the betrayal and how you've healed and have been able to kind of get into the space that you're in now, living your best life.
Yes, I'm excited to share it with you.
Awesome. All right, y'all. So sit back, relax, and let's enjoy Miss Teras. So tell us. You can start from the beginning, actually. I think knowing the beginning kind of helps understand how do we end up where we are today.
So my story all began with being married for 24 years. Totally head over heels. I can tell you the moment that I fell in love, it was Brian McKnight, the whole thing, right? I can hear it in my head now and still remember that moment. I loved a person. And I think I loved the person so much that I forgot who I was and I lost myself in a marriage. So often we as women, we kind of pour ourselves into relationships, raising children and being business owners and, pouring into our husband and the married life and the family life that we kind of forget. I'm not going to say common sense, practical things, but things that we should value. We kind of put ourselves, and I think I was taught that you put your family first and yourself second. And I think that's where that's appropriate when it's a balance. But for me, I took it to heart and kind of lost myself in a relationship.
Yeah.
And a relationship that it all started from the beginning with infidelity and betrayal. It was deep, so much so that it was years and years and years of infidelity. And I just, I'm a Christian, so I stand on Christian principles where you're supposed to forgive to be forgiven. And I think my forgiveness kind of went too far because I thought I heard, God say continually to forgive and forgive and forgive. And my forgiving was at the cost of I'm not going to say my mental state, but my emotional state. I felt like I was trapped in a body where I forgot who I was, literally forgot the person that my parents raised, the person that God said I was. And I was focused on making sure that my marriage worked. And I did it from a social standpoint because I was a wife. I was a mom with 4 children. I didn't want to go through a divorce a second time. And I had all these kids. I have 4 kids, and I didn't want to be out there in the status quo of being, rated as a single mom with all these kids. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do and forgive. And, it's one thing to forgive, but it's another thing to forgive and forget and try to hide. And I carried the shame of the relationship. I carried the shame of all the stuff that happened. Not to get too much into the detail, but my story was one where I had a stalker. My ex-husband was, and I'll say this loosely, and you understand, I was married for 24 years to a cheating deacon truck driver. Cheating deacon truck driver. And my story was one where I was deeply rooted in the church. I love God. I'm a worshiper, and I believed in, those Christian principles, and it got to a place for me where I think I threw out the common sense knowledge and was focused more on thinking that that's what God said because I was supposed to stay in and deal with it, to the point where, the person that one of the women that he was involved with hit me with a car.
Wow.
Received 4 felony counts. I had to go to court with my mom and dad and, hear the stories, and then that happened. And then I had to go to another a situation where, I live an extravagant life. I lived in a large home and drove a very luxury, car, and realized that he was out with other women. And, you talk about the betrayal. I had to not only deal with the betrayal of a spouse, but I had to deal with the betrayal of children in my eyes because my kids knew and didn't know how to tell me because they thought I knew. So, that space and time was one where it took me to a space where I had to grow now, and work through the healing of all of that. And I think the bigger issue for me is that I had to forgive myself because you said it. I allowed it. I allowed myself to go through all of that. And I allowed myself to be hurt to the point where I didn't even know who I was. I knew that I was worthy. but I didn't understand my worthiness. So it's a difference in knowing, I didn't know that I had permission to hurt and to say, stop hurting me. And I allowed this pain to constantly happen for 24 years. I really literally went through it for 24 years.
Yeah, I don't think you just said something that I feel is really important. A while back, I did a video that talked about how you can know your worth and still not operate out of it. And you just actually gave a lot more language to it, and it's really about understanding the worth. So I can know something and not understand it. And we don't think about how understanding is such an important part of just knowing something. Like, I know the law is, I need car insurance. But I don't necessarily have to understand why I need car insurance. It's just something that you got to have. I think a lot of times we look at even having car insurance as something that's irrelevant. Like, especially if you've gone so many years, no accident, no nothing, and you're just paying all this money out. You're like, what's the point of this, right? But understanding is key. We a lot of times claim to know a worth that we don't understand, or we know a worth we don't operate out of. You mentioned like losing yourself in the process. I think a lot of us do it. I think we do it because technically we don't know ourselves before we even jump into things. It's more so we're just kind of like in the mundane routine of just living, right? We get a roadmap from the people who are around us, be it our parents, the church, societal norms that says, hey, at this age, you should be married. At this age, you should have kids. If you're in the Christian space, you're not supposed to get a divorce. You're supposed to suffer, through it because God's going to help you, etc. And it's more so the notion of you can't let go. You can't walk away. You must endure all of this pain and put on a face for everybody else to see, so that you are not showing the pain that you are actually experiencing, which is why I think we have things like domestic violence that go untalked about, that go unheard of, for people that you be like, wait, you were going through that? But you came, to this meeting nice and pretty. Nobody would ever know. And it's like we are taught to hide it all. We're taught to put the mask on. And because we're taught to put that mask on, we don't know who we are. You wear the mask so long, you become the mask, and that's now your new identity, your new person. And it's like, but that's not me. So when you go through it and you decide to choose yourself, finding out who you are is always a journey. It's always like, man, how did I get here? Like, how did I allow this space to actually happen to me? But as you say, wait a minute, I allowed it. So now, I need to forgive myself. I need to, go through that process. For you, when was the aha moment? When was the moment that said, enough is enough?
So honestly, it happened when, in 2021, when I was on the Tamron Hall show. And I had to identify with imposter syndrome. And I had to really, really look at myself, because you go through an interview process and they kept drilling and drilling and drilling. I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't understand what this was. But I realized that I have my own definitions. I have ITIS. I have infidelity triggered imposter syndrome. And for me, that's a different imposter syndrome. It's because someone else told me that I wasn't worthy. And I accepted the fact of them telling me that I wasn't worthy. Because it's different when another woman speaks to you than a man speaks to you. So a woman told me that I was nothing because I allowed my husband to constantly cheat on me. So for me, it was an awakening where I had to look at myself in the mirror and see the pain on my face versus what I was feeling. And I looked at myself, I said, wow, she's beautiful, but she's so hurt. You know, you talked about the mask, you know, my hair was gorgeous, the makeup was pretty, but underneath it was a broken person who had a mask on, I don't think I was faking. I was living out my real truth, but that
Mm-hmm.
truth was deeply rooted in emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people just think about, the physical abuse, but the emotional abuse was something that I dealt with. And I had to put on the makeup. And, I've always been taught that you don't look like you feel. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're supposed to show up at all times, and me, it was hair right, makeup right, nails right, and you put on a beautiful smile. And I would have to go and be in front of a church and lead. And it just happened one day, and I was like, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm going to stand in my truth, and I'm going to say this hurts. And when I start saying this hurts, it became a loud voice that I was now nagging. I was nagging, and it was a problem now because I'm speaking up and saying, stop the hurting. And it was one thing to hear the nagging that they said I was doing, but it was another thing for my heart to cry and say, no, that's not nagging. That is you wanting to come out and say, stop. And I kept allowing that voice, my inner voice, to be louder and louder and louder until one day I just said, enough is enough. The disrespect was enough. You know, I had to recognize that I not only was hurting myself, but I had 3 daughters and a son. And I had to realize that how I was showing up for myself was reflecting upon how my children saw me. And the
Mm-hmm.
disrespect not only went from the spousal part, but it also went to my children. And I had to regain who I was as a woman. And I had to be a leader of my family to say, no, this is not the behavior that I'm supposed to be acknowledging, accepting. And I had to do the work to step out of that, not only for myself, but for my generation and my children. Because, back in the day, you know, you dealt with it. At my grandmother's funeral, I realized that that my mom had siblings that she didn't even know about, because back in the day it was accepted, men were allowed to have other women, and they just brushed it under the rug, and they just dealt with it, or they dealt with it in a space where
It
they
just kept quiet.
it, it was beyond keeping quiet. They
Yeah.
accepted it and they embraced it, and I didn't want that life. I couldn't deal with that life anymore.
Yeah. I think in the past, though they were accepting things, they also were putting blinders on for it. It was like
Mm-hmm.
a knowledge that we will not talk about, which is more than likely why siblings didn't get to know each other until adulthood, because you don't get to know, that was his life over there. It's
Exactly.
not our life, And so I do think that a lot of times we feel like we have to be dependent upon men in a way that puts us underneath them versus beside them and walking with them in partnership. And when we place ourselves in a position that says he's above me, I think a lot of times it gives the illusion that the worth of you comes under his desires, his plan, his everything. And it's like the order is God, you, your spouse, then your children. And that order goes to both parties, right? It's not just God, the husband, the wife, the children. It's for you, God, me, then my spouse and children. And for him, God, him, his spouse and his children. So both parties have an order, but we tend to merge the order into a space where it's just God, then him, then us. And it's almost more so God, him, children, and us, because we tend to put ourselves last completely, not just second, is last. And we have to stop doing that, because I literally was talking to a friend not too long ago saying, you are the whole piece of the pie, and you just have other people around you that apply ingredients that make you your whole self, right? And we constantly think that everybody else is more important than us. You'd never fuel yourself You run on empty, pouring into other people. And what are you really giving them? How are you giving them anything of yourself and you don't have anything for yourself? So it's very difficult for us, I think, to really understand how we fit in the puzzle because we put ourselves at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think I took myself out of the list. I wasn't even on the list. I mean, I really was worried more about how it looked, how it looked.
The
I wasn't
optics.
even a part of the look. I wasn't even a part of the scope anymore. I was worried about how everybody else saw me, and I didn't even worry about how I saw myself. I was so busy trying to cover it up and and make sure it looked good. Because I'll be honest, I have a way, and this is, I don't know if it's a bad thing, if it's a good thing, but people always tell me that I have a way of making things look nice and look really pretty and posh, and it could be something simple. And I think that was the same thing with my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't put on airs for anybody. I am who I am, but people romanticize my life. I don't. It's just I just have a way of making it look like it's something different. That's a gift.
Desirable.
Yeah, it's a gift that God gave me. But one thing I know, I would never, ever, ever, ever be jealous or envious of a person's life, because you don't know what
What's
it
really
costs
happening.
to get to that space. And for me, people saw that I drove a Bentley. I lived in a 6,100 square foot house. I was adored in diamonds, a 4-carat ring. I mean, I wore like 12 carats of diamond a day. But people don't understand the cost of all of that, because it was if this, then that. Meaning, if he did something, I got that. If he did this, I got that. So I felt in a sense that I was trading or being bought for a sense. Gifting was one of my love languages, but it turned into something that was like it replaced him with a gift.
It was his escape.
And it got to the point where who doesn't love gifts? But it got to the place where I was exchanging almost. And my oldest daughter told me, she says, "Mommy, I'm ready for you to see you love." Because my entire life I saw a roller coaster. I saw something happened, you got a gift and then you went up. Something happened, you went down and you got a gift and you went up. And I didn't really understand that until one day I just started looking at my life. I was like, you know what? Because I think I had PTSD where I kind of forgot things that happened, and I started associating things and things that happened in my life with the season. And it made sense, because when this happened, this and this and this, and it made sense. And that's another reason why I really wanted to this new space I'm in is reflective of who I am, not what a person can do for me, but to be authentically loved without the financial gain. I want to be loved for me and not for, I want to be loved in an authentic way and not as a materialistic exchange, if that makes sense. Now, the gifting is great if you can balance it, but I don't want it to be one where
it takes over.
Beyond takes over.
Yeah, and that it becomes the way of living. In other words, you don't want to fall back into that same trap. And I think a lot of times that gifting love language can lead to that if we're not careful, if we're not including. That's why I always say love languages, all 5 of them, even though it's way more than the 5, technically, if we give language to it. But for the sake of everyone using the standard 5 that we have, I think all of them are important. I think it's the ranking of them that makes the difference. But because we focus on the ones that we feel have ranked as number 1 or not 1 and 2 on the list, the other 3 tend to get left by the wayside when all 5 of them are technically required. Who doesn't want someone to tell them they look beautiful or give them, words of affirmation and build them up? Right. Everyone wants that at some point. You may not want it every day or every morning or, But who doesn't want someone to just do something for them that they didn't have to ask for them to do it, that helps make their load a little lighter? That's
Right.
acts of service. We all want somebody to see us in a space that says, hey, they need help. Let me go do this for them. Or they've been doing this for so long. Let me do it for once and take that load off of them. Everybody likes that. You may not want somebody to do your load every day, but if I ain't got to do laundry this week and you want to do it, thank you, you know?
Exactly.
But that may not be your first love language 1 and 2, but it's something that we desire. And we all like gifts. We all want someone to say, hey, I thought about you. Here's something that reminded me of you. Or you asked about this. Or you said, oh, I would love something, this, that, and the third. And it's like, bam, here it is. So we all love gifts. And quality time, you can't grow without spending time. You cannot grow without having connection with that person. And touch says, hey, I like you. Right. So we all desire all 5 of
Right.
the standard love language. It's just what fuels us on the regular basis that says, no, I need this in order to know. The other things are cool if they happen, but the ones that I need, that's what you need to be expressing. But I think a lot of times we don't do the balance. We don't take the 5 love languages and actually use them all. We get the ones that somebody says, hey, no, my love language is quality time and physical touch, and that's all they focus on. They make sure I call you every day or I see you every day, and then they make sure that they touch you in some kind of way. But if it's gift giving, it can be very elusive. It can be very, misconstrued in a way that says, if I mess up, I know what to do. I'm always, give, or it doesn't matter what I give because I got to give something, and that something sometimes has to top the last thing, and I think we teach people how to treat us by how we respond. But so many of us don't understand that the response we give is a pattern based upon how we were kind of raised to understand how to handle people.
Exactly. Exactly. And you touched on something. It was in the relationship, the behavior of how I responded was a standard for how he behaved. Because the more that I accepted the gift, the bolder he became.
Mm-hmm.
And so bold to the point where it was just disrespectful. And I didn't know. You know how you don't know what you don't know? And when you look at it from the outside, it's like, wait, I did that. I think I was having an out-of-body experience because the stuff that was happening, I look now, it's like, I did that. I don't even remember.
But healing allows you to see things differently too.
Right.
So I always caution women when they go, I can't believe I did that. It's not really that you can't believe you did it, because in the moment that you were doing it, that's the knowledge base that you had in that space. So it doesn't always have to be like, man, that was dumb. You should have never did that. That didn't make any sense. Because no, it did make sense. And it wasn't about if it was the smart thing to do, the right thing to do. It was the thing that you knew to do, right? It was your response in the moment. But you come out of it now and you heal and you have all this new knowledge, right? It's a new explanation. It's a new explorer. It's like, I see it differently. And when you can see something differently, you can have a different intellectual response that you never would have had you not gone through the healing process. So I want to transition into that process. What was your healing process like? You went through it. You decided, bam, this is what it is. I'm not staying here anymore. I'm getting out of this. You get out. You go through the process. It's done. It's final. And now you sit with you. What is that healing process like?
Hey, hope you're feeling the love in today's episode. We'll pick back up where we left off in a moment. First, we're excited to share that Tammy has a collection of self-love t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and journals for you to express how much you love yourself to the world. From comfy hoodies to motivational mugs, there's something for everyone. While you're listening to today's show, feel free to browse the full collection at IamTammyNicole.com. Thank you, and without further ado, let's get back into today's show.
So that was the hardest space of my life because for the first time of my life, I was alone and I had to sit with myself and no one was around and I had to have conversations with me about me to me. And I couldn't lie to myself. There was no mask. There was no nothing around. It was just the authentic me going through the phases of my life and accepting what I had done and forgiving myself for each and every incident. I had to literally go in my mind and understand how it happened, why it happened, and deep dive into the feeling that it made me feel. Because I never dealt with it before. I accepted it. I brushed it off before and was like, okay, it'll pass. But I took the time to find out what was the root cause of why I accepted that behavior. What was going on in my life that made it okay for me to accept someone treat me that way? Because I don't blame him. I believe hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And how can a person love you when they don't know how to love themselves? So I took him out of the picture altogether. And it was me accepting the fact that I was worthy of love and expecting someone else to make me happy when it's not his responsibility to make me happy. It was my responsibility to make myself happy. And he can add to my happiness, but he couldn't. And that's the life that I live now. I don't, what's the word? I don't expect or accept anyone else's words when they say, I want you to be my peace or I want to make you happy. You can't make me happy. I have to be whole within myself. And then you can add to my own. So me doing the work looked like me sitting with myself, me writing it down, me journaling, me going back and looking at, I've always been on social media, but going back and looking at the old me before the stuff started happening and looking at pictures of myself before stuff started happening. Because even the woman I was before is not the woman I was at that moment. I had a glow. I had my walk was different. My stance was different. My posture was different. And then to look at me now and to look at my face, like to look at my eyes and go back and look at who I was before I realized what happened and regain that woman. Like, who is she? Study her. We spend time in studying celebrities and what their life was like. I went back and looked at my own notes and stuff that I wrote. And I reminded myself of who I was. And I did the work on not getting back to who she was because I never want to go back to that person. That person that she was vulnerable enough that she allowed this to happen to her. I want to build on who I was then to become the person I am now, to never allow that to happen, to never allow myself to be in that desperate space of wanting to be married, of wanting to be a mom, and I wanted to be a person that was seen as a good person. I never want to be that person again. So I did the work to make sure that I put systems in place and benchmarks for me that if I hear this word, that's a no. And it's not more of a trigger. It's more of, I understood what love bombing was. I understood what the terminology was, and understanding what my worth was, and understanding that if this made me feel uncomfortable, and I'm not going to say triggered, I'm going to say uncomfortable, I have boundaries set in place where, no, let me just revisit this a second. Let me pull back naturally, not all the way back, but pull back enough to
see the picture better.
Yes, for my senses to go off and start paying attention, and now I pay attention to consistency. I pay attention. It's just not about words, it's words and actions. Those things, because, in the space I am, and that's not just in a relationship, it's with people, period. I hear things and I say, and one of the biggest things I learned now is I learned to listen. I learned to listen to someone's words and not react so much. And I learned a space to be quiet. Quietness doesn't always mean that it's a problem. Quietness just means that you want to really focus and hear what that person is really saying.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we create narratives on our own that don't technically exist because we want certain things to be a certain way. So it's like when you are able to be quiet and retreat and really go, no, what did they really say? And does what they say align with what they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because when words don't align with actions, then I question, did you hear correctly or did you interpret it the way you desire?
Mm-hmm.
Because we do that a lot as women in general, because we just have a desire to be loved, to be wanted in a way that will lead us in a space of hurting ourselves, because men will tell us exactly what it is and we will reframe it and we will redo it and we will make it more than what we want it to be all of the time. So I love that you were able to retreat, listen, and not necessarily create the narrative, but allow the narrative that's being told to really be seen before you make moves, before you can, truly get back there. But it allows you to trust yourself, because learning how to trust you is ultimately the goal. Because as you were saying, when you allow people to do certain things, the real focus comes into what did you do for you. You abandoned you. So you have to now retrust yourself, your decisions, your discernment. Like just simply saying, looking at people sideways, like, love bombing is a thing at 100%. And when I look at love bombing, I ironically look at it as men who are really trying so hard to understand love and not lose something that they really desire in the moment, but not knowing how to articulate their true feelings. Sometimes it's not just ill intent. I think a lot of times we say the word love bombing and people immediately think it's an ill intent event or experience. Not all the time. Now, is it sometime? Yeah, because you have predators, right? So you have men that literally prey on women who they have identified having low worth, low self-esteem, etc. And they're like, oh, she'll do anything I ask. So let me just show her a few things, because don't nobody ever want her. They can see it on her essence. I don't know how men have this sense of, oh, she'll do anything. But I really think it comes from women being so willing, right? You meet them and you're just like, there's no need to have a screen up. It's like, I'm me, I'm cool with being me. And, how do they get to know me if I'm not me? But you don't have to overgive. You don't have to overextend. You don't have to do things that technically isn't required at the phase of a relationship that you're in. And that doesn't matter if it's friendship, romantic, or what have you. It's understanding the phase and understanding yourself to a point that you say, you know what? I'm not going to give more than that's required in this moment, because I don't have to perform for you to love me. And I think that's what it ends up being. We start performing for the love because we desire it so much and we think it's never coming, but we think we have to accept what's there. And it's like, no, you don't have to.
Exactly.
You don't have to.
Exactly. That you made some really good points there. And I think what was important for me to understand was as I grew out of that space and I became my own person, I think one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did was because I didn't think I could do it by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think, I had gotten so far down into, I don't even know if the word was depression or, because most people think that when you're depressed, it's always suicidal. It's not that. It wasn't.
Oh, no.
It wasn't that. It was. I didn't believe that I could live outside of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I didn't think that I could survive. And the
Yeah, it was
fact
full
that
dependency.
yes, I didn't think that I could live outside of that world. And I'll be honest, the first time I walked into, I moved out of the big house and came to, I call this my little house on the corner. And the first time I came into the little house on the corner and I sat in this house by myself, I was scared. Like I was scared. I had 4 kids at that time. I got married at 17. I was by myself. I didn't know what I liked. It was the first time I sat with myself outside of my parents' house. I went from my parents' house to my husband's house. And so for me, it was like I had decisions to make. Like, what color sheets did I want?
Yeah.
No, what color dishes did I want? I was for the first time in my life making decisions that I wanted.
Yeah.
Like everything about this new life was about what I wanted. And for me, for the first time, it was sitting with myself and making decisions by myself. And I was excited because I didn't have to worry about taking care of anybody. The first time I had dinner, I had Fruit Loops and milk. you know, I was making decisions of doing things that I wanted to do. And it was so much freedom. And I realized that I love myself enough to have what I want.
That
It
part.
was new to me. You know, everything in my home now is about what I wanted, what I liked, and what I desired. And during that process, I learned how to eat healthy, and I lost 50 pounds. And I think it was more than emotional weight. I deserve to look good. I wanted to feel good, not for a
Yeah.
person, but
Right.
for
For you.
myself.
Yeah.
I started doing things for me. And the more I did for me, the more I realized I liked doing stuff for me.
Yeah.
I liked taking care of me. I liked, going on dates by myself. And it's okay to live a healthy life outside of a man, outside of
Hmm.
children, outside of being
Absolutely.
a mom. It's okay to love me for me. And I gave myself permission to love me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
When my mom passed last year, and I went on a personal sabbatical. I gave my children a note. I emailed my children. I mean, I texted my children and said, I love you all very dearly. I'm married twice, so I have 2 sets of kids from each husband. I said, you all have fathers that are outside of my mother. I said, I need time to heal. I understand you need your mom, but I need my mom, and my mom's not here. So I need for everyone to go to their respective families, partners, dads, and allow me time to process my life without you all. And so I went on sabbatical. They were like, wait, we need their mom. I said, well, I need my mom, and she's not here. So I gave myself time to grieve by myself. But I think I would not have done that if I had not gone through the process of healing from a relationship, because at that time, that was the most traumatic thing in my life. So when my mom passed, I realized that I need time to take time for me. And
Yeah.
I never did that before. I didn't know it was allowed
Yeah.
for me to have a moment where I didn't take care of somebody else.
Yeah.
So that
Because we're taught to do it. We're taught from a very young age that the care of other people is most important, and you are always
last.
last. Like you're shamed to think of yourself. You're shamed to even. You're just shamed for it all. Like,
And I got one bigger
and
than I got one better than that. So when I was growing up, it was you have a daughter. Well, your daughter hair must look better than yours. The daughter must always look good, and you're second. Well, why we can't both equally look good? She looks good, I look good. So
right, but she's a reflection of me. So the reality is that I need to be on my own standards in order to even give her one. You know
right,
what I mean? I
exactly.
think it's a sad situation that we have when we become parents, when we become a wife, that it's always the other person needs to be what's considered. When the reality is, without me, there is no them, period. Like, I'm still the nucleus. I'm still the glue of the situation. Me being their wife allows them to be a husband. They can't be a husband without me being a wife. So I'm important. Me being a mom They're not children without me. Like they didn't get here without me. So it's important to start with who? Me, because that's where it starts. But we don't put ourselves first because we feel like it's just the wrong thing to do. We've been taught it's the wrong thing to do, when in reality, I have to love me before I love you. Exactly how we got here.
Right. For me, it was a deep conversation that I had with my mother in 2022 or so. And I had a moment when I had to talk to my mom about some things. And I'm blessed that I had that conversation before my mom passed, because it would be an emotional moment now to want to have that conversation. She's gone. You can't, it's hard. I know people that are angry with a dead person. It's a horrible feeling. And one of the things I asked my mom was, I said, Mom, I've always wondered why she would, it was something as simple as when I was younger, we would go to Louisiana, and some of the things that we would do, we did because she didn't want someone else to feel uncomfortable. Well, in that making someone else feel uncomfortable, it was starving me. And so I had the conversation with her about it. She says, well, no, baby, that's not what I meant. It was a misunderstanding. But as a child, I held on to that my entire life. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that was the reason why I stayed longer, because, as you said, I was taught that. But my mom said, I didn't mean for you. It was a misunderstanding. And I carried a misunderstanding for 40, 50 years of my life.
That wasn't the lesson she wanted you to learn.
It wasn't. Got it. She apologized to me for that. And once I heard her apology, it ignited something in me, and it auto-corrected, and it said, never again would that ever happen to me. Because, when your mom teaches you something, it is stone. It is what she says is law. But when my mother said, no, ma'am, that's not the permission I gave you, it did something to me. It said, oh, no, 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 no. It auto-corrected, and I was ready then to reface, like, no, that's not what my mama told me. And that's when part of my life changed.
That's awesome, because we don't always realize how much we need that correction to come from them. I mean, now granted, I'm a firm believer that, they raised us the way that, with the knowledge that they had, with the tools that they had. It may not have been all that's necessary for me to live life today, but it's my responsibility to heal or grow from that message or lesson that I learned from them that may have been imperfect or written incorrectly, but had a gist of understanding till now. But when you do have the opportunity to have a real conversation, to gain real understanding, it can flip your world completely upside down, or shall I say right side up, because it'll give you the opportunity to say, oh, I get it now. Mm-hmm. It gives you permission. And I think that you needed that. And I love how God orchestrates life, because he give us what we need, even when we don't know we need it. Mm-hmm. Because that was your butterfly experience. It allowed you to fly in a way that you were such in a cocoon for so long, unable to spread your wings. But her giving that permission gave your cocoon permission to break, and your wings the ability to move. And that, I love that for you.
That's beautiful, Tammy. I like that analogy. That's beautiful. That was good. Yeah.
I love that for you, because we don't always understand. You know what I mean? We don't always see it. It's like we know it, but it's certain things that just kind of sit in the pit of our stomach that never get to come up and come out, because it's like either we're afraid to do it, or we just say, oh, that's so much of the past, I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna deal with it from this perspective. I acknowledge it, I move on and keep it pushing. But sometimes you actually need a processing that says, oh no, I get it for real now. So I love that for you.
I love it for me too. You know what? And that me saying that's something I never did before, because I thought that was arrogance. Mm-hmm. But no, I do. I love this for me. When people say that and you accept it, I was coming from an age where it wasn't allowed to say that. It was considered to be bragging about things. And I've taught myself and my children, it's not bragging if it's true. And I do love this for me. I'm deserving of this. I am worthy of this. And the fact that you acknowledging it, well, great, thank you, but I don't need your permission anymore. I now hold the power for myself. And you're right, I do. And it's not arrogance, it's true. And I stand on that.
Facts, all the way. So I appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope that it liberated some women to just live the life that they actually were designed to live and deserve, and understand that though it may be scary to move beyond the betrayal, it's necessary. And you can heal, you can trust, you can get back to a point where you feel so secure in you. You do not have to stay stuck or stay in a betrayal that you don't deserve. Because in the end, though they betrayed you, once you become aware, once you become fully knowledgeable of how that betrayal is affecting you, you then become betrayal of yourself when you don't do something about it. And you deserve more. So, I have a book out called Me, Myself, and Love that teaches you how to what? Love yourself in a way that says, let me get to know me. Let me figure out where I learned what love really means and how love decides to show up and what I decide to accept. Because a lot of us are just moving off the love that our parents taught us, that we didn't stand up for our own definitions, our own perspective. They give you the roadmap. It's on you to decide which turn to take.
I agree. That's beautiful. I agree.
So again, Teras, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure. I appreciate your story. I appreciate your vulnerability. I'm going to say to the women, live your life for you. Whatever comes along with it, make it your choice, because you do matter. Remember, love yourself so much that the love from others is a bonus.
That's good.
I will see y'all next week. This is Transformation Tuesdays over at Loving Me Before I Love You. Have a good one.
That's a wrap on another episode of Loving Me Before I Love You. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to show your support by subscribing and leaving a positive rating and review on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Stay connected with Tammy. Make sure you're following her on Instagram and TikTok at Coach Tammy Nicole. If you like to work with Tammy or have any questions you'd like her to answer, please head over to www.IamTammyNicole.com. Until next time, always remember to love yourself so much that the love from others is a bonus.